Hello listeners, this is Chris, and I wanted to let you know that Season 3 is coming. We have a lot of fun stuff lined up. We'll start with the Voyage of the Dawn Shredder, and our first episode of the season will actually feature David from Pints with Jack. We'll have a lot of stuff on Tolkien pop culture, past and present. I have a Q&A with Serena Higgins on Charles Williams, as well as several interviews with other authors who are Inkling-ophiles. Later in the season, we're also planning on beginning the space trilogy. Beginning it, we'll probably just get through Out of the Silent Planet. Anyway, those are just a few of our plans, but we're always open to making new ones. If you have something you'd really like to see this season, email us at inklingsvarietyhour@gmail.com. That's inklingsvarietyhour@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll probably invite you to come talk with us if you do. So no pressure. All right, back to the show. Christmas by Charles Williams. Let us go a journey, quoth my soul to my mind. Past the plains of darkness is a house to find where for my thirsting I shall have my fill, and from my torment I shall be still. Let us go a journey, quoth my mind to my heart. Past the hills of questing by our ghostly art, we shall see the high worlds holy and clear, moving in their order, without hate or fear. Let us go a journey, quoth my heart to my soul. I shall never thrive on the world's dole. Past the streams of cleansing shall a house be found, where is peace and healing for my aching wound. By the streams of cleansing, by the hills of quest, by the plains of darkness, they came to their rest. As the kings of Asia, they went to a far land. As the early shepherds, they found it close at hand. When they saw St. Joseph by their ghostly art, forget not thy clients, brother, quoth my heart. When they saw Our Lady in her place assigned, forget not thy clients, mother, quoth my mind. But my soul, hurrying, could not speak for tears when she saw her own child lost so many years. Down she knelt, up she ran to the babe restored. O my joy, she sighed to it, she wept, O my Lord.
I was pointing out last time that the Christian life is simply a process of having your natural self changed into a Christ self.
All right, hello, and welcome to the Inklings Variety Hour, where fans and scholars of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Charles Williams, Owen Barfield, and others talk about their works and lives. This is our Christmas spectacular extravaganza. I'm Chris Pipkin. With me today are Logan Huggins. How you doing, Logan?
I'm doing very well. I just got a cheerful spirit. You know what I'm saying?
And also we have Kora Burton. How are you doing, Kora?
I'm doing great. I am really feeling this holiday season.
And first timer on the show, Eric Geddes.
Oh, I'm good. I just discovered this podcast maybe a month ago, and it's my favorite right now. So this is very honored to be here. Thank you, guys.
Oh man, we're so honored to have you. Thanks so much.
We're glad you're here.
Coming on the show. It's my favorite podcast too, Eric, but not really the one I listen to the most. The basic idea with this episode, we are going to be talking about the Inklings and Christmas, and we're going to be reading some of their fiction and prose in a kind of potpourri format. Really, anything the Inklings have written that's about Christmas is on the table. Also, any kind of Christmas memories that you have related to the Inklings is also worth talking about. Well, why don't we start out with that, actually? Does anyone have any Inklings-related Christmas memories kind of make them feel nostalgic for the holidays or an Inklings-related thing that they do every year for Christmas?
I remember going with my family to see the first Narnia movie, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, the day it came out. And I believe this was Christmas Day, the day it came out.
There's no mistake. Aslan is on the move.
But yeah, no, it was really cool, and it's very warm memories.
Aslan, we need your help.
I know, but understand. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you want. But what I do have are a very particular set of skills. I will look for you. I will find you. And I will kill you.
Other Inklings-related Christmas memories that anybody has?
I'm fairly certain the first time I really dove into an Inklings book at all was over Christmas break when I was in college. Someone let me borrow Mere Christianity on tape, which was very encouraging to me because I was a busy commuter student and I was all over the place. I didn't have time to sit and actually read. And my car at the time actually still had a tape deck. I was able to totally devour Mere Christianity within that 2-week period. So that always reminds me of sort of like Mere Christianity is sort of that first steps into C.S. Lewis, and because you always hear, oh, he did Narnia, but like to step into his serious theological works and his works on Christianity was such a great wealth of information and really edifying to my faith. And I think I'm fairly certain that happened around the Christmas time. Yeah, that's something that I always like to connect with.
That's really cool. There is something about the Inklings that suits Christmas, even though, and maybe that's just because they're Christians, just the way that they were, for the most part, so many of them were such people of faith, so into just kind of celebration and feasting and festive stuff, right? And a lot of times I think we set those things at odds, and for the Inklings they were absolutely meant to go together. Yeah, so there's just something like, even though obviously, like I think in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings and most of Lewis's fiction, you're not going to get like a ton of stuff about Christmas, although there is some. The sort of spirit of kind of incarnational joy and celebration is so present in their works, in the same way that it is at the best Christmas festivals. That's part of the reason I'm excited to talk about all this. For me, my Christmas-related Inklings memory that I'm going to steal from Kora is going in college to see the Lord of the Rings films, because I definitely remember doing that. And like just before Christmas break in college, we went to see all three, and I would get together with people and go to the theater and watch the Lord of the Rings every year in college, which was always pretty cool.
A day may come when the courage of men fails, when we forsake our friends and break all bonds of fellowship. But it is not this day. An hour of wars and shattered shields when the age of men comes crashing down. But it is not this day. This day we fight. By all that you hold dear on this good earth, I bid you stand, men of the West!
But Kora brought up a question. Do you want to say what it is?
That's a really good segue into the main question, which is, are Peter Jackson's Lord of the Ring movies Christmas movies? They came out concurrently, like 3 years in a row, right, during the Christmas season. And I've just heard this colloquially from people. I also did some looking up, and there have been articles written about it and Twitter hot takes and all that kind of thing, of course. But I've known families who like get together and watch the entire thing in a day. They have it on while they're making their Christmas cookies and they're having Christmas dinner or whatever, or they'll do it on like Christmas Eve. And so I wanted to put the question to you guys. Is it a Christmas movie?
Well, let's just look at the facts here. There is snow. There are elves. There's a healthy amount of magic. I almost said Father Christmas shows up and gives gifts, but that's Narnia, sorry. No, there's elves, there's magic. There are 5 golden rings, at least. In excess of 5 golden rings.
That's true.
What else is there? That's what's coming to mind right now.
I mean, there's a big moral lesson about becoming too obsessed with shiny things.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. Material things getting in the way. Yeah, I like that.
What about Arwen enchanting the river to wash the bad guys away?
The river of forces that come by and wipe out the Dark Riders. I'm pretty sure the one in front had a very shiny nose, so I think that would work.
Yeah, I remember that too.
At the beginning of Return of the King, Elrond re-gifts Aragorn his sword. So that's classic Christmas behavior.
But you know who the most generous giver of all is in Lord of the Rings. It's the Lord of the Rings himself, Sauron, who embodies the spirit of Christmas and the sort of passive-aggressive, strings-attached giving that we've come to expect that time of year. He doesn't just give to one race of Middle-earth. He gives to all three of the main races of Middle-earth, elves, men, and dwarves. And if he keeps a ring for himself, that's okay. You're allowed to reward yourself a little bit on Christmas. So my vote for the most Christmassy person. But I think to a certain extent, like, Christmas movies become Christmas movies by being played at Christmas on reruns on TV, and Lord of the Rings definitely is. My wife actually has memories of her mom watching Lord of the Rings like every Christmas while her mom would be doing like other things like grading. And
I think you hit on a good point there of like Christmas movies don't necessarily have to be completely about Christmas or even in the Christmas season. Because I remember growing up, I think it was Fox Family, and then they turned into ABC Family, and now they're like Freeform, I'm pretty sure. But they always did their like 25 days of Christmas movies. And one of the biggest things they always pushed and were proud to show were like all 8 Harry Potter movies, which I think they mentioned Christmas twice in the first 2 movies. I think it comes up in like 2 scenes in the first one and then 1 scene in the second movie or something like that. And so, of course, that qualifies those whole movies as Christmas movies. And I'm sure ABC Family at the time was like, great, let's just push out all these highly famous, highly profitable movies and take up some airtime.
Happy Christmas, Harry. Happy Christmas, Ron.
You got to fill up the 25 days with something.
I know. You can only show Nightmare Before Christmas so often or whatever. So, yeah, that always used to crack me up.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder if there's something about the comfort of a movie that everybody knows, right? That you don't really have to pay terribly close attention to. Although, like, I don't know, with Lord of the Rings, it's so much of it is such a spectacle that even if you miss some of the finer points of what's going on, it's still enjoyable to watch, right? And so you can kind of have it on in the background. Same with the Hallmark Christmas movies. Same with same with a lot of different movies that are just popular, whether it's Wizard of Oz or or more like directly Christmas themed movies. It just seems like
The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, and The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe as well. Although in The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, we also have Father Christmas coming. I seem to remember from the movie that they did a pretty good job presenting Father Christmas as Lewis envisioned him. It wasn't just like a fat, jolly guy from a Coke commercial. He was a joyful guy with how was he dressed?
It's like a big open front red robe.
Yeah.
And he had like a white beard, but he wasn't like round bellied like Coke Santa is. Yeah. Well, he hadn't had enough Coke yet. And then they were all at the top and did see. It was a sledge, and it was reindeer with bells on their harness. But they were far bigger than the witch's reindeer, and they were not white but brown. And on the sledge sat a person whom everyone knew the moment they set eyes on him. He was a huge man in a bright red robe, bright as holly berries, with a hood that had fur inside it, and a great white beard that fell like a foamy waterfall over his chest. Everyone knew him, because though you see people of his sort only in Narnia, you see pictures of them and hear them talked about even in our world, the world on this side of the wardrobe door. But when you really see them in Narnia, it is rather different. Some of the pictures of Father Christmas in our world make him look only funny and jolly, but now that the children actually stood looking at him, they didn't find it quite like that. He was so big and so glad and so real that they all became quite still. They felt very glad, but also very solemn. "I've come at last," said he. "She has kept me out for a long time, but I've got in at last. Aslan is on the move. The witch's magic is weakening." And it goes on, and he of course gives gifts to the children, and their gifts that they could use in the coming war. It's a really interesting moment in Narnia, and I'm not sure that Lewis would have included it if he'd envisioned this whole like Narnian universe or whatever, but it's fascinating, and it seems to work. The premise is it's always winter and never Christmas. Yeah, what are y'all's thoughts about Father Christmas coming to Narnia? I love this. I think this hits on something that C.S. Lewis does super well, and we see him do this over and over and over again. Lewis is so good at taking something that we may not recognize as having any kind of value. Like we may look at Santa Claus and be like, oh, that's not really any spiritual value in that, or there's no really real redeeming value in that. It's been sort of washed up through Coca-Cola and marketing and all that. But he has a way of taking things and calling you back to an older meaning, a more significant place of appreciating these things. He is so good at redeeming these secular things and fitting them into a world with Aslan, with a sort of a Christ head at the top of it. But I love how when they see him, they're like, this isn't the sort of silly, goofy Santa Claus and like store windows. This almost makes us be reverent. He uses it so well, this funnel adoration towards Aslan. To me, when I think of C.S. Lewis, that's like his main jam, is doing that, of taking these images, taking stories, taking mythology, etc., science fiction. He takes all these things and allows you to see it in a fresh way through the lens of Aslan, through the lens of Christ, and it changes your view on those things completely, which I really appreciate.
Yeah, the solemnity of the moment is really interesting, and it's it tracks with what Lewis says in I believe it was Preface to Paradise Lost, where he's talking about the word solemne, this idea that we now use the word solemn to mean like overly serious, right? But that's not what they used the word solemn for back in the day. There was a joyfulness to the solemnity, right? Which again gets to these sorts of two aspects of Christmas that Lewis is trying to reconcile without watering down. And I think the brilliant thing about this depiction of Father Christmas is you'd think, especially if you'd watched a lot of recent Christian stuff or read a lot of recent Christian stuff, you'd think that it would kind of water it down, right? And certainly cartoons, like modern cartoons, kind of water down Santa Claus, or there's not much there to water down in the first place, right? Like The Visit from St. Nicholas is not a terribly substantial poem, right? And that seems to be like our canon when it comes to like what Santa Claus is exactly. But Lewis kind of digs deep into, like you're saying, Logan, myth, and produces this character that's very like Father Yule, or this sort of ancient figure of Old Man Winter that Santa Claus kind of in part comes from. And he's able to present it in this sort of strength because he's so interested in recovering myth and presenting it to the imagination. You know, that whole thesis, Lion, Lich, and the Wardrobe, is the jovial book, right? That it's supposed to be like Jupiter. You know, this character definitely exemplifies that sort of Jovian tendency.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this scene is a great example of the eucatastrophe that we see so often in Inklings' works, that I wonder too if that isn't why they do feel so apt for Christmas, is that during Christmas we're thinking about the great eucatastrophe, the greatest one of all, and then to kind of have these mini moments that mirror that, it just feels right.
My only disappointment is that Father Christmas doesn't show back up at the end battle, at the end of Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe.
I know.
Like, there should be a scene somewhere of in between of all the animals fighting and the Narnians fighting and the giants, and there should be just a sleigh being pulled by so many reindeer and like a dual wielding samurai sword Santa Claus just going as hard as he can. But you know, we can't knock him too hard for that. He's done a lot of other good things, so I'll try to give him a pass for that.
No, I agree there. Like, he should have brought Father Christmas back for the last battle. It would have given me more of a sense of closure. Maybe he's only allowed to come back when it's Christmas, and maybe the last battle was just the wrong time for it. We have not yet talked about the reading at the top of the show, which was Charles Williams's poem. It's a really interesting poem, and I'm sure it has great depths that we don't have time to plumb. But do you all have any thoughts as to what it means with the soul? Let us go on a journey, quoth my mind to my heart. Or let us go on a journey, quoth my soul to my mind. And they're going on this journey and going on this journey. And then finally at the end, first seeing St. Joseph, then seeing Mary, then seeing the Christ child. But these things also seem to have like an additional like allegorical meaning, from what I can tell anyway. Any thoughts on the meaning of this poem?
I think there's one part that I understand and another parts are like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But I think the part that at least what I take it to mean is like he's talking about let's go on a journey, quoth my heart to my mind, or my mind to my soul, or it just came to me, what if he means it has to be all of you that, or all of us that is engaged in looking for Jesus or worshiping Jesus, or I don't know.
I really like that. I think that's fantastic. Yeah, that makes sense. Quoth my soul to my mind, quoth my mind to my heart, quoth my heart to my soul. It reminds me a little bit of and apologies, listeners, or anyone here, if you do like this Christmas Carol, but I have a lot of trouble with it. Do you see what I see, or do you hear what I hear, or whatever it is? These like vaguely Christmassy characters that aren't really in the Christmas story, but they're talking to each other and saying like, said the mighty king to this person, said this person to that person. So it seems to like parallel that, but it's like you're saying, Eric, it's like it's the elements in one human being, which I like a lot more than the Christmas Carol. And it seems to be a kind of, certainly an internal journey, but described as though it's an external journey. I am really puzzled about the line, forget not thy clients. We've got 2 repetitions of that. When they saw Saint Joseph by their ghostly art, forget not thy clients, brother, quoth my heart. When they saw Our Lady in her place assigned, forget not thy clients, mother, quoth my mind. And I'm sure if Serena were here, she'd be able to unpack that for me, but I got nothing. Anybody have an idea what he means by forget not thy clients? Listeners, many of you are smarter than us. So if you can unpack this poem for us, please do. It's beautiful and so evocative. And I'm really glad to have come across it. Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for suggesting it. Kora, you mentioned the Festival of the Good Children, or the Feast of the Good Children in Smith and Wootton Major, as a kind of like Christmas Eve feast. Do you want to read that passage?
Yeah, so listeners who tuned in to the first episode that I did with Chris will remember Smith of Wootton Major. There was one festival to which all looked forward, for it was the only one held in winter. It went on for a week, and on its last day at sundown there was a merrymaking called the Feast of Good Children, to which not many were invited. For on that occasion, the master cook was expected to do his best, and in addition to many other good things, it was the custom for him to make the great cake. And during the events of Smith of Wootton Major, we meet this very begrudging master cook named Noakes. And so, skipping ahead to where we find his cake, at the feast, Noakes's cake stood in the middle of the long table, inside a ring of 24 red candles. Its top rose into a small white mountain, up the sides of which grew little trees glittering as if with frost. On its summit stood a tiny white figure on one foot, like a snow maiden dancing, and in her hand was a minute wand of ice sparkling with light. In the story, it's demonstrating this very childlike understanding by Noakes of what the fairy means. But for me, it immediately translates to the Nutcracker vibes. For me, particularly, Dance of the Sugar Plum Fairy. I don't know whether this is like embarrassing or cool. My first interaction with the Nutcracker was the very first Barbie movie, because, girls just have to watch those as they come out. And so the very first Barbie movie was the Nutcracker.
Barbie in the Nutcracker. Yours to own on video.
And this just makes me feel, but yeah, again, the connection between this cake that is trying its best to be what the kids want, and then it giving off these vibes of being the very pretty fairy from the Nutcracker. I don't know. It feels very Christmassy. It never says in the story that this is a Christmas feast, but it is the only feast held in winter, and so it feels very Christmassy to me.
I love that.
I'd forgotten about the description of the cake itself, but that does sound very Christmassy.
And it's
and
a
the
star,
red candles
right?
too.
Yeah, and it includes like stars. Is that what he?
So there's a star hidden inside the cake.
Yes,
the fairy
that's right.
star.
Yeah, to me that's very Christmassy too. The Star over Bethlehem, the star on top of the Christmas tree, like all that is very reminiscent.
No, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean it's hard to deny that he's thinking at least partly of Christmas when he's writing about the the Feast of Good Children. I wonder why, because it's kind of set in the Middle Ages. I wonder why he didn't just say Christmas and why he chose to make it the Feast of Good Children instead.
Yeah, I don't know. There's not a lot of particular details setting it down any one particular place, only that it's medieval European. And at one point, when he's in Faerie, he actually sees a army of men returning from over the sea, and it feels almost like Beowulf, these great warriors coming from across the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a tension and also an attempt at resolution, at least in Lewis and Tolkien's work. Again, between things like Faerie with an R-I-E, right? Like the proper type of, from their perspective anyway, Faerie, the things that are not diminutive, but that instead make us feel small, versus the things that are diminutive and kind of cute and kind of easy to control. I think just the tension does manifest itself in their works to a degree. Like certainly in Smith of Wootton Major, Tolkien is exploring that tension, right? To what extent can these little goofy things kind of actually transport us into the sublime world of Faerie? And it's interesting to know that Tolkien himself wrote, his kind of first forays into children's fiction anyway. Sort of the ancestor of the Hobbits was the Letters from Father Christmas, right? Which is almost entirely like just goofy things that his children will like. It's got elves, but the elves are, the type of elves that Logan was referencing. But Tolkien kind of been writing about both kinds of elves at the same time, because he was certainly already doing the Silmarillion mythology when he's also writing about like these elves at the North Pole and the Father Christmas letters. This is again one of the many, many letters that Tolkien wrote and lavishly illustrated to his kids.
Cliff House, North Pole, Christmas 1937. My dear Christopher and Priscilla, and other friends in Oxford, here we are again. Of course, I am always here when not traveling, but you know what I mean. Christmas again. I believe it is 17 years since I started to write to you. I wonder if you have still got all my letters. Have not been able to keep quite all yours, but I have got some from every year. We had quite a fright this year. No letters came from you. Then one day, early in December, I sent a messenger who used to go to Oxford a lot, but had not been there for a long while, and he said, "The house is empty, and everything is sold." I was afraid something had happened, or that you had all gone to school in some other town, and your father and mother had moved. Of course, I know now. The messenger had been to your old house next door. He complained that all the windows were shut and the chimneys all blocked up. I was very glad indeed to get Priscilla's first letter, and your two nice letters, and useful lists and hints since Christopher came back. I quite understand that school makes it difficult for you to write like you used. And of course, I have new children coming on my lists each year, so that I don't get less busy. Tell your father I am sorry about his eyes and throat. I once had my eyes very bad from snow blindness, which comes from looking at sunlit snow, but it got better. I hope Priscilla and your mother and everyone else will be well on December 25th. I'm afraid I have not had any time to draw you a picture this year. You see, I strained my hand moving heavy boxes in the cellars in November. I could not start my letters until later than usual, and my hand still gets tired quickly. But Ilbereth, one of the cleverest elves who I took on as a secretary not long ago, is becoming very good. He can write several alphabets now: Arctic, Latin, that is ordinary European like you use, Greek, Russian, runes, and of course, Elvish. His writing is a bit thin and slanting. He has a very slender hand, and his drawing is a bit scratchy, I think. He has done you what he calls a picture diary. I hope it will do. He won't use paint. He says he is a secretary and so only uses ink and pencil. He's going to finish this letter for me, as I have had to do some others. So I will now send you lots of love, and I do hope that I have chosen the best things out of your suggestion lists. I was going to send hobbits. I'm sending away loads, mostly second editions, which I sent from only a few days ago. But I thought you would have lots, so I'm sending another Oxford fairy story. Lots and lots of love. Father Christmas.
This is definitely kind of the way that Tolkien got into writing for children, right? And you can hear some of the playfulness, come back in The Hobbit. If anybody wants more Father Christmas letters, we did a whole episode, maybe last year, maybe 2 years ago, on the Father Christmas letters. So feel free to check that out. The thing I really wanted to end with was a satirical piece by Lewis that, just as they're interested in the tension between the kind of tacky elves and the, real elves that are medieval elves, sublime elves, or they're also interested in, what Christmas really is, and to what extent does the way that the Christmas that's generally celebrated in especially secular culture, to what extent does it intersect with actual Christian Christmas, right? Celebrating the birth of Christ. This is a quick little satirical essay that Lewis wrote about the way Christmas is observed in Britain. He's pretending that it is a lost part of Herodotus's history, where Herodotus describes the weird customs of different people and different cultures. The island of Niaturb, which of course is Britain spelled backwards.
In the middle of winter, when fogs and rains most abound, the Niaturbians have a great festival which they call Xmas, and for 50 days they prepare for it in the fashion I shall describe. First of all, every citizen is obliged to send to each of his friends and relations a square piece of hard paper stamped with a picture, which in their speech is called an Xmas card. But the pictures represent birds sitting on branches, or trees with a dark green prickly leaf, or else men in such garments as the Niaturbians believed that their ancestors wore 200 years ago, riding in coaches such as their ancestors used, or houses with snow on their roofs. And the Niaturbians are unwilling to say what these pictures have to do with the festival, guarding, as I suppose, some sacred mystery. And because all men must send these cards, the marketplace is filled with a crowd of those buying them, so that there is great labor and weariness. But having bought as many as they suppose to be sufficient, they return to their houses and find there the like cards which others have sent to them. And when they find cards from anyone to whom they also have sent cards, they throw them away and give thanks to the gods that this labor at least is over for another year. But when they find cards from any to whom they have not sent, then they beat their breasts and wail and utter curses against the sender. And having sufficiently lamented their misfortune, they put on their boots again and go out into the fog and rain to buy a card for him also. And let this account suffice about Xmas cards. They also send gifts to one another, suffering the same things about the gifts as about the cards, or even worse. But during these 50 days, the poorest, oldest, and most miserable of the citizens put on false beards and red robes and walk about the marketplace, being disguised, in my opinion, as Kronos. And the sellers of gifts, no less than the purchasers, become pale and weary because of the crowds and the fog, so that any man who came into a Niaturbian city at this season would think some great public calamity had fallen on Niaturb. This 50 days of preparation is called, in their barbarian speech, the Xmas rush. But when the day of the festival comes, then most of the citizens, being exhausted with the rush, lie in bed till noon. But in the evening they eat 5 times as much supper as on other days, and, crowning themselves with crowns of paper, they become intoxicated. And on the day after Xmas, they are very grave, being internally disordered by the supper and the drinking, and reckoning how much they have spent on gifts and on the wine. For wine is so dear among the Niaturbians that a man must swallow the worth of a talent before he is well intoxicated. Such then are their customs about the Xmas. But But the few among the Nyaturbians have also a festival, separate unto themselves, called Christmas, which is on the same day as Xmas. And those who keep Christmas, doing the opposite to the majority of the Nyaturbians, rise early on that day with shining faces and go before sunrise to certain temples where they partake of a sacred feast. And in most of the temples they set out images of a fair woman with a newborn child on her knees and certain animals and shepherds adoring the child. The reason of these images is given in a certain sacred story which I know but do not repeat. But I myself conversed with a priest in one of these temples and asked him why they kept Christmas on the same day as Xmas, for it appeared to me inconvenient. But the priest replied, "It is not lawful, O stranger, for us to change the date of Christmas, but would that Zeus would put it into the minds of the Nyaturbians to keep Xmas at some other time, or not to keep it at all. For Xmas and the rush distract the minds even of a few from sacred things. And we indeed are glad that men should make merry at Christmas, but on Xmas there is no merriment left." And when I asked him why they endured the rush, he replied, "It is, O stranger, a racket," using, as I suppose, the words of some oracle and speaking unintelligible to me, for a racket is an instrument which the barbarians use in a game called tennis. But what Herodotus says, that Xmas and Christmas are the same, is not credible. For first, the pictures which are stamped on the Xmas cards have nothing to do with the sacred story which the priests tell about Christmas. And secondly, the most part of the Nyaturbians, not believing the religion of the few, nevertheless send the gifts and cards and participate in the rush and drink, wearing paper caps. But it is not likely that men, even being barbarians, should suffer so many and great things in honor of a god they do not believe in.
And here Lewis is pretty stark about, well, there's the way that secular culture celebrates Christmas, and there's the way that Christians celebrate Christmas. And I think in other places, without necessarily contradicting that, he does more highlight, like in the Visit from Father Christmas, for example, that it is a time to be joyful. That is part of the way. In Meditation on the Psalms, there's a chapter called The Fair Beauty of the Lord, and he talks about a Christmas poem an Easter poem that a child writes that starts with chocolate eggs and Jesus risen. And he's like, that's exactly what you want. Like that's a perfect poem because it recognizes both the spiritual dimension and the kind of material dimension.
Let me just take this opportunity to say that if you are also bothered, like C.S. Lewis and Charlie Brown, by the disjunction between Christmas and Xmas, you may want to check out the site my wife and I do. It's called 12tide.com. That's 12tide.com. We advocate fasting during Advent and celebrating all 12 days of Christmas from December 25th to Epiphany, January 6th, like they used to do back in olden times. This allows us to take a more meditative approach to the season and be a lot less stressed about buying everyone's gifts on time. Anyway, feel free to check it out. It's called 12tide.com. That's 12tide.com.
So I want to see if we can either think of an Inklings-themed Hallmark-style Christmas movie or an Inklings-themed Christmas Carol. But before we do that, I have a quick question. Kora, are you aware of a Hobbit Christmas? I think they celebrate like some sort of Yule. Like their months are called like for Yule and after Yule. I don't know if that's in the appendices or something else.
It sounds like something that would be in the appendices, Eric.
Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking, I think in The Hobbit, there's like one reference to when they're on their way back, Gandalf and Bilbo stop at Beorn's house for Yuletide.
Okay.
But that's the only one I can think of that's actually in the books.
Good memory, though. Yeah, that had slipped my mind. Well, Gandalf's interesting, right? He's a bit of a, all joking aside about Sauron, Gandalf's a bit more of a Father Christmas sort of figure. And he kind of aligns with Lewis's Father Christmas a little bit better than Tolkien's early Father Christmas does.
Yeah, I mean, he brings fireworks for all the kids. It's great.
I mean, in general, in Tolkien, what saves people is the willingness to be homely, right? And the willingness to be able to have fun and enjoy. I mean, I'm sure there are other things that save people as well, but in Tolkien, the fact that Gandalf is the type of person that would enjoy hobbits, right? And enjoy being around hobbits and having festivals with hobbits, even if they think he's fairly weird, right? It kind of makes him, I mean, number one, of course, it makes him a good person and a good wizard as opposed to like all the other wizards in Middle Earth. But it's also very much parallel to Father Christmas because the hobbits are all diminutive. They look like children a bit, you know, they're very interested in getting nice things to eat, like my children are. Certainly they're humble. I mean, the difference being that not all of them like Gandalf necessarily, but yeah, Gandalf comes and it is kind of like, you know, he kind of makes the celebration for Bilbo's party, brings a lot of the supplies and fireworks anyway. Interesting parallel. He does not come through a chimney, however.
The Hallmark-style Christmas movie sounds fun to discuss.
Yeah. So what are you thinking? What do you think would make a good Hallmark-style Inklings Christmas movie?
Well, you have to have this whole like city versus country thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Arwen and Aragorn, you at least have this like elf and human. We're different. That could work out really well.
They are kind of both from the country, sort of, right? I mean, Rivendell is kind of a country-ish place. Like if somebody came from Minas Tirith, for example, yeah, like a sort of Faramir Eowyn thing.
I was just going to say that.
Right. And Eowyn's used to a small town like where the Rohirrim live. Faramir's the city guy, and he has to get used to their Rohirric ways. Learn how to ride a horse, and there could be some comedy with that.
He's recovering from wounds, so you can even work in like an amnesia like storyline.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Christmas with the Rohirrim or Christmas at Medusled. Yeah, I like it. So the person from the city usually thinks they're big stuff. Yeah, so is he journeying to Rohan to try to acquire Rohan for Aragorn? This would be like after the Lord of the Rings thing. Rohan is kind of like the family business for her, right? And so she's very proud of it. And he's coming as like kind of like the corporate CEO who doesn't like the country, doesn't really like horses. She has to teach him during Yule to learn how to ride a horse and
drink in the mead hall.
Yes, I was just going to say that he's got to learn how to drink like one of them. So that at first they fight a lot and she's a very fiery character herself, right? So that works pretty well. That they would be at loggerheads until maybe he decides not to acquire Rohan for Minas Tirith at the end for Gondor.
Instead, he decides to stay.
Yeah. I like it.
Then Aragorn could show up at the end. You've got native.
Yeah.
How dare you do this? I'm staying here. This is
Yeah. Well, there could be a big twist where, much like King Richard the Lionhearted at the end of Robin Hood, like he comes back and Aragorn's like actually totally cool with it. And Faramir's just been stressing the whole time, you know, thinking that his boss was going to fire him.
He actually just wanted to get him out of the city. Go live a little.
And he's actually like fairly relieved that, you know, he felt a little bit guilty about ditching Eowyn before. Maybe that wouldn't track so well with the Hallmark formula though. But yeah, I think we got ourselves a Lord of the Rings themed Hallmark movie.
Coming to Hallmark Channel this Christmas. She's your typical horse maiden.
I'm just so relatable and down to earth.
And he's a big shot from the big city.
I'm super into my work, but still very charming and relatable.
Together, they live, laugh, love their way into each other's hearts.
I didn't like him this morning, but now I love him.
She's so down to earth and relatable.
That is my one defining characteristic.
From the creators of 5 Golden Rings of Power and Elves on Shelves, comes a very predictable love story.
You're just so relatable. I love how we can laugh together so naturally.
Ha ha.
Ha ha.
Ha ha.
Ha ha.
Ha 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 ha
ha ha.
We're so cute and relatable.
Gondor with the Wind.
So now all we need to do is pitch it, and I'm sure there will be no trouble in getting this made. Any other potential Hallmark-style Christmas stories we could tell?
I'd love to see Mr. and Mrs. Beaver characters from the movie get their own, because they're very, very funny in that. It's kind of like, I want more of that.
Yeah, no, they were great in the movie. If they could get like a Christmas special similar to the Star Wars Life Day special, you know.
Oh, that would be a riot.
And it's just like all the beavers hanging out together in a house and watching weird hollow TV, except it would be like the Narnian equivalent, so probably a lot less obnoxious. And then Father Christmas comes by and is like, hey, everybody. You just have various Narnian characters just sort of stopping by and doing little guest spots. Maybe you'd have some important Narnian performers coming to, perform the ballad of, did they just call it the Ballad of the Horse and His Boy? Because there's a part before like the actual Horse and His Boy book where some minstrel is singing that ballad, and C.S. Lewis says something like, oh, you'll have to wait to hear this story, but I forget if it's like Prince Caspian, something else where they're singing that. But that's one song we know about in Narnia. I guess you could also have fawns and nymphs dancing and things like that, which, like, okay, we do get to see that. The silver chair, they do finally emerge, and they get to see the fawns dancing and the nymphs dancing, and I guess that's mainly alluded to throughout Narnia. So it'd be kind of cool if there was like a Life Day-esque episode or Christmas special of Narnia where you just had like guests coming by and it featured the beavers prominently and nymphs and fawns dancing and singing and things like that. All of these, of course, would be prohibitively expensive to make because the rights to all of this intellectual property is impossible to get. But yeah, nevertheless, I fully expect that people who have access to those rights are listening to this show, and so please do make it, guys. All right. Well, Eric and Kora, thank you all both so much. We'd love to have either of you back, sometime during season 3. It was great talking to both of you.
Yeah, it was great being on.
Thank you both so much for coming on. And listeners, thank you for joining us for this Christmas extravaganza. Yeah, have a Merry Christmas.
All blessed encounter full of joy, unscheduled on a decent plan, with here an addict of Tolkien, there a Charles Williams fan.